Hi guys, Assalamu alaikum. I hope you're well, and I just let me know if you can hear me properly, and am I audible? Just give me an update. Also, share the link with your friends and colleagues so that they may join the stream as well. We're gonna be doing past papers, and today is what? Today is like 20th, right? Yeah. So today is the 20th of Jan. And this stream is, guys, the AS stream, and from here onwards we are going to be continuing our streams, from today onwards. And this is our first stream, and here onwards we're going to be continuing this series for past papers on our streams, hopefully. And it's good that you guys should be joining, and so that you can learn how to attempt past papers and all, and make sure that you share the stream link with your friends and colleagues and peers. So guys, we're going to be doing one of the recent questions that have troubled a lot of students recently who appeared in October, November as well. And most of the students who sort of gave the exam in October, November, and when the results came out, some of them have also received their scripts as well, the private candidates. And they were sending me in for these scripts to sort of check that where have they lacked, and majority of them have been getting quite bad marks in 8 markers and 12 markers. And so the whole idea is that in this stream we're going to be discussing how to attempt these past paper questions. Jack the Ripper. This stream is for AS. Okay, so the first question says, with the help of an AD AS diagram, explain why two components of AD may increase, and consider the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation. Right now, before I were to tell you what are we supposed to write in this and how you're supposed to write in this, my first question, I would like you guys to know, I would want you guys to tell me that what do you guys think would be the assessment objective 1 for this. Do remember that whenever you're sort of answering past papers, let's talk about the 8 markers first. Your marking is basically done based on your assessment objective. So you have 3 marks for knowledge and understanding, 3 marks for analysis, and 2 marks for evaluation. Now this is pretty basic, and I'm assuming that this is January, we are right now in January. So all of you must be aware that this is how the marking is done based on assessment objectives, and this is basically the marks breakdown. But saying that 3 marks are for knowledge and understanding, or 3 marks are for analysis, and 2 marks are for evaluation, this is basically not really knowing. This is not the answer pattern. This is not called answer structuring or answer pattern. This is just the marks breakdown pattern. So when usually we sort of ask students that are you guys aware of the answer pattern and how do we write answers, and so they're like, yeah, I'm aware of the assessment objectives. You have 3 marks for AO1 and 3 for AO2 and 2 for evaluation for 8 markers. So this is just a marks breakdown. This is not how you're supposed to attempt past. I mean, this is not exactly the structure of an answer, how that should be. The first question says, with the help of an AD-AS diagram, explain why 2 components of AD may increase, and consider the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation. So Jack says, can you teach us how to solve 8 markers? That is exactly what we're going to be doing today. So make sure that you stay till the end. Now, the first thing that you need before you write anything down, whether you're attempting knowledge and understanding, whether you're attempting knowledge and understanding, or whether you're writing AO2 or AO3, first you need to identify. The first step is that you need to identify what to write in the assessment objectives. You need to identify for this question that what is knowledge and understanding. You need to identify what will be analysis, and you need to identify what will be evaluation. Iman says, when will you do the stream of solution of the test you've given before? Yes, Iman, that was something that was initially pending, but we got busy in a couple of things. I will be doing this in the near future, probably this month or in the coming months. Hamara streams to chalti rahengi. We're going to be continuing these streams, so I will be doing that. Don't worry. So the first step is that you need to identify that what is knowledge and understanding, what is analysis, what is evaluation. But make sure that you share the stream, this particular stream link with others as well, so that people can know how to attempt past paper questions. Now, The first thing is that, and this is the most difficult part, first figuring out what knowledge and understanding is, figuring out what analysis is, and figuring out what evaluation is, because this actually varies from question to question, right? जी टॉपिकल ही हम कर रहे हैं शरियार दिस इज एग्जैक्टली वी आर डूइंग टॉपिकल पास पेपर्स आई मीन दिस इज इट आई मीन वी आर डूइंग मैक्रो पास पेपर्स राइट वी हैव स्टार्टेड विद मैक्रो and this is we're going to be doing inflation questions and a few ADS questions and we'll try to cover once a week we'll have these past paper streams so we'll see what we can do and how things progress from here onwards, and I'll see how are you guys responding and whether you're joining regularly and stuff. So I'm going to ask you guys one question. Now read the question very carefully. Read the question carefully before I start answering. Read the question. It says, with the help of a diagram, ADS diagram, explain why two components of AD may increase and consider the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation. With the help of an ADS diagram, the question says, explain why two components of AD may increase. So explain why two components of AD may increase. This is like one part of the question. The second says, and consider the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation. And consider the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation. Now, my question to you is that what is knowledge and understanding for this question? What is knowledge and understanding for this particular question? What is AO1? Like, what will you write in this? What will you write in AO1? How will you start this answer? What will be the first 3 to 4 lines of your answer? Because this is known as answer structuring. The first thing that you need to identify as a student is that you need to first see that what will be the AO1 or what will be the knowledge and understanding part of your 8 marker. What will be, what should be the first thing that you will write in this question? What will be your first line? What do you think you will be writing here? So, because that is the first thing that you need to write. Also, do remember, guys, that these 8 markers are basically point-based marking, right? And as we move on with our streams, I'm going to be telling you guys what is point-based marking versus 12 markers is your level-based marking, and what is the difference between point-based and level-based. As an examiner, I am telling you this, and obviously as a student, you must be aware, you must be knowing what point-based and level-based marking is. Now, I am still waiting for you guys to tell me that what will you write in assessment objective 1 for this question. Now, the first thing that you basically will be writing for this question is that what you will be talking about is that this is basically, you need to understand कि 3 marks आपने देखें, सबसे पहली चीज़ आपको ये समझना ज़रूरी है that knowledge and understanding has 3 marks, and when you're talking about point based marking, the examiner will give you a mark for that specific point only, right? So anything extra that you are writing will not be rewarded in a point based marking thing, right? So you need to be very specific, you need to be very relevant for an 8 mark question. No drawing unnecessary diagrams, no elaborating unnecessarily, no trying to impress the examiner and putting out things that the examiner doesn't really wants to even sort of read. We will be direct to the point, specific, and provide knowledge only that is relevant, that is only scoring, right? So the knowledge and understanding part in assessment objective 1 would be that 3 marks. Basically what you need to talk about is that you need to draw an ADS diagram. You need to shift your AD to the right? You need to shift the AD to the right. Very good, Iman. You'll draw the ADS diagram. That is perfect. You'll shift the AD to the right, and then you will explain 2 components. Now the 2 components that I will be explaining is C and G. The reason I'm explaining C and G, that how will they result in a shift in aggregate demand to the right? How will they result in a shift in aggregate demand to the right? And I'll later on, you can also explain investment as well. You can also go with net exports as well. But C and G are sort of pretty easy. No, Jack, C. That is exactly what I wanted. I wanted you to mess up in the comments. This is exactly what I wanted. This is what I was waiting for. Someone says this so that this is what we as examiners, when we are checking the answers, that is why students do not get the marks. अब ये देखें इन्होंने he said that explain is AO2. अब this is again and consider वाला part तो evaluation है ना, वो तो ठीक है. And consider वाला part तो evaluation है, but explain यहाँ पर analysis नहीं है ना. Analysis किस तरह identify होती है? देखें यही तो आपको हम अपनी क्लासेस में यही चीज़ सिखा रहे होते हैं कि आप आइडेंटिफाई कैसे करेंगे एनालिसिस क्या है. हाउ विल यू आइडेंटिफाई व्हाट एनालिसिस इज. ऑलवेज रिमेंबर दैट एनालिसिस प्रिसीड्स योर इवैल्यूएशन एंड सुपरसीड्स योर नॉलेज एंड अंडरस्टैंडिंग. तो आपने नॉलेज एंड अंडरस्टैंडिंग आइडेंटिफाई करना होता है. यू हैव टू आइडेंटिफाई इवैल्यूएशन एंड देन द मिडिल पार्ट इज योर एनालिसिस, राइट. सो इफ एंड कंसिडर दूसरी चीज, सेकेंड थिंग, what do you evaluate? You evaluate the analysis. Remember that. You evaluate. देखें इसके इस फॉर्मेट के अलावा आपने जो कुछ भी लिखा, you're writing this, but apart from this, whatever you write will not be rewarded if it deviates from this format. ठीक है? If it deviates from this format, you will not get the marks because this is a point-based marking. You have to identify what analysis is. You have to correctly identify what evaluation is. You have to correctly identify what knowledge and understanding is. So the question, so the trick is that, we teach our students that evaluation, you evaluate the analysis, right? So the evaluation is that, and consider the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation. So considering the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation is you making a judgment that would factor in the evaluation that whether an increase in AD will always lead to inflation. Now the answer is no, it will not. It will not always lead to inflation. So inflation will happen. Will inflation happen? Yes, it will happen. So yes, it will happen is analysis, but will inflation always happen? Is there a chance that inflation doesn't really happen if AD rises? Is there any possibility? Do we have any goddamn possibility that inflation doesn't really happen when AD rises? Of course we have. So the fact that inflation does not happen when AD rises, this part is basically analysis as well. The fact that inflation will not happen is also analysis, not evaluation. Now, once you have identified, because remember analysis is two sides in economics AS exams, analysis is always two-sided. So whenever question comes, consider the extent of something. Consider the extent of something. So you will weigh up arguments in the evaluation. You need to weigh up these arguments. What arguments, my students, you need to weigh up? The arguments that you will make in the analysis, which will most probably be two-sided, right? So ये हो गया. Just a second. So define. अच्छा ईमान, आपने I think शुरू में you wrote you will define aggregate demand and aggregate supply. ठीक है? Okay, ईमान, you will define aggregate demand, but you don't need to define aggregate supply, because if you define aggregate supply you will not be given a mark for that. उसकी कोई mark नहीं मिलेगा आपको. Even इसमें आपको aggregate demand define करने का भी mark नहीं मिलेगा. आप कर दें define, you can define it, but you won't be awarded the mark for that. The reason being is you need to understand, but then obviously you can start off with defining AD. At times it becomes difficult for us to exactly accurately identify that whether we need to give the definition or not. I suggest my students, you can give the definition, but give the definition of the relevant thing, which is AD here. You can start off by defining what AD is. You don't need to define what AS is. ईमान, आप इस बात को समझें, और ये सबको मैं बोल रहा हूँ. You need to understand that आपके knowledge and understanding के सिर्फ 3 marks हैं, उससे ज़्यादा नहीं है, right? So आप so इस बात को आपको समझना पड़ेगा. And if the diagram, तो इसमें diagram के 1 mark है. 1 mark is for the diagram. The other 2 marks are coming from why would AD rise? What will cause the AD to rise? The components of a rise in AD, that is, let's say it could be C, it could be I, it could be G, or it could be your net exports. ठीक है, तो so moving forward ये हो गया, right? Any other question that anyone has before I start opening the solution in it? So this is what your this is what your knowledge and understanding would be, and then we will be basically be moving on to now our and then I'll show the solution. I mean, and the knowledge and understanding as well, and the analysis as well. But is there any other question that you guys have before I move on? So analysis will be two-sided here, okay? And consider, you need to understand and consider the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation. Now, ये जो सवाल होते हैं and consider the extent, ये बहुत ज़्यादा इस तरह के में उसमें आते थे आपके माइक्रो में भी, these questions used to come, and consider the extent to which a beach is regarded as a public good. Over there as well, I taught my students analysis में, when beach will be regarded as a public good, when beach will not be regarded as a public good. You have to give two sides, right? You have to give two sides. In that as well, in our classes, we taught our students that you have to give two sides. ठीक है? अच्छा, Usman says, what will we do in evaluation? Usman, you need to just hang on a bit. अभी हम evaluation पे आएंगे तो उसमें आपको ज़्यादा बेहतर समझ में आएगा. But for that, you need to wait for me to be done with analysis. Only then I will be able to better explain what we will do in evaluation. Iman says, when are we supposed to completely done with the syllabus? You must be completely done with the syllabus by 1st April. First day shouldn't exceed 1st April. First, second से ज़्यादा नहीं होना चाहिए with past papers. By the way, you should be done with the syllabus by the 1st of April with topical past papers. Coming back, knowledge and understanding. Let's start. देखें मैं किस तरह इसको शुरू करूँगा. ये मेरी पूरी आंसर की अच्छा लेंथ भी बाद में देखते हैं. So an increase in aggregate demand. Now you will stay with me. An increase in aggregate demand. You will read with me as well. And please, guys, students who are joining late, share the link of the stream. Ask them to join right now so that it can benefit more and more students. Otherwise, the same questions will be repeated over and over again. What is evaluation? What is analysis? And then it's just no point repeating it over and over again. And okay, an increase in aggregate demand refers to, अगर आप command words में आए, हमने अपने तो students को ये we've shared it, but consider का जो होता है, especially when they say consider the extent, right? Consider the extent. Whenever they are saying consider the extent, you have to weigh up the arguments, and when you're weighing up the arguments, to what extent is something achieved? To what extent is something achieved is evaluation. So to what extent is inflation achieved is what is evaluation is. But the analysis will talk about whether inflation will always be achieved because of a rise in AD or not. ठीक है? An increase in AD refers to a rise in total spending in the economy at each price level, as illustrated in the diagram below. As illustrated in the below diagram. Better ये है कि आप you define what increase in AD is. You define what increase in AD is. Why are you defining AD first, AS first? Because उसका कोई मार्क नहीं है. आपका एक मार्क इधर इसका है बस. इसके अलावा किसी चीज का एग्जामिनर आपको मार्क नहीं देगा पॉइंट बेस में. ठीक है? So you draw the aggregate demand curve, you show the real GDP going up, you show the price level going up. This is a similar, you guys must be familiar with this because these streams are assuming that you're already aware of the syllabus. So you will say that the aggregate demand shifts from AD1 to AD2. Also make sure that whenever they're asking you, when they have specifically mentioned that you need to draw a diagram, you need to draw a neat, clean, clear diagram. Then you move on to say, then I said in knowledge and understanding, one mark is for the diagram, 2 mark is for explaining why aggregate demand rises. You can join our courses by visiting my website. My TAs would be sending the link of the website here, so you can join that. Anyways, 2 components of an increase in aggregate demand. Would be 2 components of an increase in demand that may increase our consumption and aggregate spending, right? So, government spending. Consumption may rise due to factors such as higher so you say now you need to explain why consumption would rise and how would that cause a rise in AD. So consumption may rise due to factors such as a rise in disposable incomes Or maybe the consumer confidence goes up and consumers become more optimistic, so they start spending more, and they're getting more optimistic. They're getting more optimistic because AD is rising, incomes are rising, they're getting more optimistic, and they feel that they'll stick around there for long and they won't be unemployed, and so they feel good about the economy and they feel that their future is secure and stuff like that. So they would start spending more, and that would cause a rise in AD. Or maybe interest rates go down. And if interest rates go down, we know that the cost of borrowing goes down, so it becomes cheaper to borrow loans, and as a result, more people get more loans and they spend more. When they spend more, AD goes up. That encourage. देखें पूरी बात करें. Analysis में you need to complete the chain. If the chain is missing, the examiner will put a question mark or TV. Like you need to complete. You can't say you cannot say consumption rises because of a rise in consumer confidence. This is you not developing the point. So the mark will not be given proper. So cause, effect, consequence. I always tell my students in my classes that you need to complete the chain that is cause, effect, consequence. That is, you say, what is the cause of a rise in AD? Consumption. Why does it happen? Because of a fall in interest rate. What happens because of that? Cost of borrowing goes down, households spend more, and that causes a rise in consumption. Then government spending may increase as a result of expansionary. अब देखें यहाँ पे unnecessarily students would start defining consumption, government spending. Why are you defining consumption and government spending? You don't need to define all that stuff. You will not be given any marks for that. That would be just waste of your time. Government spending may increase as a result of expansionary fiscal policy. For example, let's say the government starts spending more on infrastructure, healthcare, or education. Now the government spending starts going up. And we know that government spending starts going up because one of the reasons for a rise in government spending is to stimulate economic activity. To maybe bring the economy out of recession and to close these negative output gaps if the economy ain't doing that well. So what you say is that an increase in either component shifts the AD to the right. Isme aapko now, once you are done with this, you will get 3 complete marks. Okay? So again, like I said, 1 mark for this and 2 marks for this. This completes knowledge and understanding, 3 marks. Okay? Iman, you can say that analysis is like because therefore leading to I mean analysis is like you answering the question narrative and giving both sides to it, and then but the thing is that while you are doing that, you need to talk about this, that, what, how, when. And a golden, what we teach our student is the 3-point agenda. The 3 points, the 3 things that they should keep in mind is the cause, effect, CEC, that is the cause, effect, consequence relationship, or the cause, effect, consequence chain, whenever they're explaining something. So, if, let's say they're saying that, public goods are not provided by the free markets, and you're saying that because of the free rider problem. So now you've identified the cause, the free rider problem. Now, what is the consequence? That causes, as a result, people aren't really willing to pay for it because of the free rider problem, which arises because of non-excludability and non-rivalry. And so there's no profit incentive to buy. And as a result, the effect is that, the effect of the free rider problem is that people are not really incentivized to buy, and as a result, the demand isn't registered in the market. And the consequence then is that public goods are not really provided by the market, and hence you see that there is a completely missing market or a really bad market failure when you have free markets. Alpha says AD question came 2 times in this year. Yes, exactly. It came twice and it came last year as well. Now ADS questions are coming more often now because Cambridge has identified, if you go through the examiner reports as well, these questions aren't really done that well by the students, and that is why. Now let's see that why, how are you supposed to do the analysis for this? So a rise in aggregate demand can lead to, now again, let's reread the question. I always teach my students that when you're answering a question, you need to go back. You need to reread the question, right? You need to read it again so that you know that you're on the right track. Because honestly, I'm saying that sometimes students really start off well. They have done like great knowledge and understanding, and it's like 3 on 3. But then when we as examiners start reading the analysis and, they completely go off track. And even, my TAs also tell me that sometimes, the exams that we are checking, the TAs are also going through our internal exams. They're like, the student just went off track in analysis. Now, so what do you think? Like I said, analysis mein, what do you need to explain? You need to talk about why inflation occurs, why inflation does not occurs because of a rise in AD. And consider, now how did you conclude? This is the question that I'm asking you, and I want you guys to answer me this. And I want you to answer it very fast. Don't take a lot of time. Just write it quickly in the comments. How did you conclude that, you're supposed to write that how would inflation occur and why would it not occur? How did you end up concluding that? What was the conclusion? How did you conclude that you need to talk about why inflation could happen, why it couldn't happen, or why would a rise in AD not lead to inflation? How did you end up concluding this is analysis? Yeah, think. Because, that's not, my job is not to give you a solution. My job is not to just give you a goddamn solution. My job is to train you that how are you supposed to think in an actual exam. I'm not going to be there with you guys. Hazila Fakir Bucks, we will try to do question 4, hopefully, in the coming week. Let's see how this is our first stream. And we will be doing question 4 of this as well, and more questions later on. Like, we'll have our streams once a week, at least once a week for the start, and then let's see how it goes on, and we can gather some audience here on YouTube. So, how did you end up deciding? This is my question to you guys. How did you end up deciding? Yes, what do you think? Yes, Iman, what do you think? How did you end up deciding that you need to give, like, inflation, why does that happen, so why inflation would not happen? ये दिमाग में कैसे आया हमारे? How did we decide that? We looked at what the evaluation two-sided नहीं होती, Jack. Evaluation two-sided नहीं. Evaluation is not two-sided. Evaluation का कोई analysis two-sided होती है. Evaluation is not sided. It's evaluation is balancing of the arguments and reaching a fair conclusion. The second part of the question says, consider the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation, right? So we know that inflation can happen. We know inflation cannot happen. Now listen to this very, very carefully. Exactly, Usman. ऐसे ही है. So you telling inflation can happen because of a rise in AD, you telling inflation will not happen because of a rise in AD, this is analysis, okay? You telling why inflation will happen, why inflation will not happen is actually analysis. And then you evaluating that, okay, fine. We have really talked about analysis that why inflation could happen, why will it not happen, or when will it not happen. Now the evaluation would be to balance them off or weighing up the arguments. Like, in what circumstances would it always happen? When will it not always happen? This is evaluation. So you telling that inflation will happen or will it not happen depends upon certain this and that factor. That is what evaluation is. ठीक है? Is it clear? I hope it's clear now. So analysis में क्या करेंगे? You'll say that a rise in aggregate demand can lead to demand pull inflation as higher spending increases pressure on limited resources, causing firms to raise prices. Hence, general price level rises from P1 to P2 as shown in the above diagram. ये आपके diagram में नजर भी आ रहा है. See, a rise in aggregate demand doesn't cause inflation. That is not the cause of inflation. That is the trigger for inflation. That is where the entire problem starts. That's where the problem starts to occur, like from the root cause. It's a trigger. A rise in AD is a trigger. It's a stimulus. That is not the reason why demand pull inflation happens. Demand pull inflation happens because when AD goes up, it starts to rise. That is accompanied by sudden rise of spending in the economy in various forms, like government spending, consumption spending. So there's a boost of economic spending in the economy, and the point is that puts pressure on our existing resources. and that causes, and that pressure on our existing resources, and what really happens is that you have you are facing existing bottlenecks in production, and that causes a pressure. Maybe your factories are operating beyond full capacity, and labor is working overtime and all of that. So that causes your costs to go up. And when cost starts going up, that firms really start transferring that cost on consumers, and so you have demand pull inflation. Now, don't think this is the cost push inflation. This isn't cost push. This is demand pull inflation. Because you need to ask yourself that how and why is a rise in AD causing inflation? And the reason is that when AD goes up, that triggers the inflation process. But what completes the inflation process is the fact that it's putting pressure on limited resources, and it's driving costs up. It's driving costs up along the aggregate supply curve, and ultimately firms push back that cost in the form of inflation on the economy. Firms start raising prices. So that is the reason why it happens. But now you guys might be thinking cost push inflation में भी cost बढ़ रही होती है, but वहाँ पे cost independently बढ़ रही होती है. Cost of production exogenously बढ़ रही होती है. Like suddenly oil prices go up, or wages go up, or raw material prices go up. So factor prices, the factor input prices, that itself exogenously changes. That's the reason for cost push inflation. While demand pull inflation में अगर cost बढ़ रही है, वो इसलिए बढ़ रही है because pressure demand side से आ रहा है, that you need to produce more, you need to produce more, you need to produce more, you need to produce more. So, but cost push inflation में there's no pressure to produce more. There is pressure to produce less because of a rise in cost of production. So, however, if the position, now the thing is that however, if the position of AD relative to AS is such that the economy is operating below full capacity, and you have a lot of spare resources and unemployed labor, then firms can increase output without really significantly increasing costs. So if the AD goes up in that sense, and since firms have spare capacity, they can pull off a good move by increasing AD without really increasing costs, and that would not really cause an increase in inflation. Again, Jack, the thing is that you are an A-level student, you're not an IGCSE student anymore, right? So obviously, this really works. Saying directly that AD is going to cause a rise in inflation is an IGCSE move, right? We teach IGCSE students right there, but you're an A-level student. So you need to at least give a line that what is the reason why that's happening. Not more than one line, just very briefly, just the way I have done it. So firms can, so again, spare capacity में, right? Spare capacity की वजह से what will really happen is that because of spare capacity and unemployed resources, firms can increase output without significantly increasing costs, resulting in higher real GDP rather than higher prices. So what you'll notice is that GDP will go up, but your prices won't really go up. So you will not really have inflationary pressures, despite the fact that AD is going up, because you have a lot of unemployed resources. And again, वही वाली बात है ना आपकी कि अभी जो मैंने, and ये जो जैक का सवाल है, this actually has to do with what I was just teaching you guys right now, that when you have unemployed resources, let's say if I am unemployed for a long time, then I will be open for any work at any wage rate, because something is better than nothing, right? So if you have a lot of unemployed resources in the economy, then firms can use those resources to produce more output without really paying them a lot. And so firms won't really witness higher costs, so they won't really transfer higher prices to consumers. So that is the reason why, because of spare capacity, even the fact that when AD goes up, inflation doesn't happen. अब ये वाली बात है ना, ये जो आप लोग लिखकर आप सोचने वाली बात है ना, ये क्या बात हुई है, स्पेयर कैपेसिटी है तो AD बढ़ने से इन्फ्लेशन नहीं आ रही, इसके पीछे कोई तो लॉजिक होगी ना, तो यही लॉजिक है, कॉस्ट ही वो लॉजिक है. Spare capacity again is not the reason. The reason is that because of spare capacity, costs really won't go up because you have unemployed workers who will be willing to work at any wage rate. So firms won't really experience higher costs. In contrast, on the other hand, if the economy is close to or at full capacity or at full employment, if your resources are either you're very close to full employment or you are at full employment, an increase in AD is more likely to cause inflation because your productive capacity is constrained. You really don't have the resources anymore, or even if you have, they're going to burn out or exhaust very quickly. So a rise in AD is going to cause inflationary pressures here. Got it? I hope you're following. But again, the mistake students would make here is, I mean, I won't really call it a mistake. I would just say that they are not really aware of the pattern, that they would end up drawing unnecessary diagrams and they would end up jeopardizing their time, because you have an opportunity cost for everything. Every line that you write, you have an opportunity cost. So there's no point in making diagrams here, because there's no marks awarded for a diagram for all these diagrams that you will end up making, other than this diagram that you need to draw at the top. Okay. So don't waste time making unnecessary Keynesian diagrams showing spare capacity, and there's no need to model all of that through a diagram. Furthermore, what you will say is that again, now there are two reasons why inflation will not happen. And students, usually what we notice in the exams is that students usually miss out this reason. They do mention spare capacity without really doing a great job at explaining that. But they do miss out this reason that I'm talking about. And that reason is that furthermore, inflationary pressure also depends upon the supply effects of an increase in AD. For instance, let's say that, you're increasing government spending, and your AD goes up. So let's say this is your let's say this is LRAS and this is AD. And if your AD goes up, your economy would witness inflationary pressures, because the price level goes up from P1 to P2, and you have more inflation now, let's say. But then, sorry, just a second. My bad. Just a second. So if let's say this is your SRAS, and if your basically AD goes up, you have like more inflation now, right? So but you see, I mean, if government spending is rising, so AD would rise, and then you'll have more inflation because price level will go up. But then ultimately a rise in government spending will boost efficiency and productivity in the economy, because you're investing in healthcare and education and infrastructure. That will shift your LRAS curve to the right. And so what will happen is that that would prevent prices from increasing any further, because your productive capacity is going up, right? Or another diagram that you could end up making is that, let's say this is your aggregate demand curve, and let's say this is your aggregate supply curve. So maybe let's say if AD is going up, and government spending could, let's say in the form of, I don't know, maybe subsidies or something, could simultaneously cause an increase in your aggregate supply. So that could cause a downward shift in your a rightward shift in your aggregate supply curve that will push the price level back down to where it was originally. So it will offset that effect. So what we're actually saying is that government spending could have supply side effects. And what happens is that if the government spending is directed towards, or the government spending is focusing more on infrastructure and education, then it may increase your long run aggregate supply. And when your LRAS goes up, what happens is that when your long run aggregate supply increases, basically, when your LRAS increases, your productive potential goes up, your productive capacity goes up. And as a result, the inflationary impact of higher AD may be reduced, or, it may even be offset. Because your productive capacity has gone up, so now you have more resources. You have more resources to sort of, now you have more resources, and because you have more resources, then you can cater to a rise in AD. Because now, when AD would go up in future, then you will have a lot more capacity to cater to all that rising spending. So when your spending is going up, and that is causing a rise in aggregate demand, then AD, not AC, AD. So when AD is going up, that is going to cause a rise in AD. When government spending is going up, that's going to cause a rise in AD. And since you have a rise in productive capacity, since you have a rise in productive capacity, now you can cater to that rise in AD, so that it won't really cause inflationary pressures, right? So that's what I've written, that in this case the inflationary impact of higher AD may be reduced or even offset, or even the price level may fall depending upon the size of the LRAS shift relative to aggregate demand. ठीक है? So got it? So दो चीज़ें हैं. एक तो ये कि आप बात करें, what you will talk about is that you'll talk about spare capacity, then you will talk about the fact that government spending goes up, that causes LRAS to increase, and because of a rise in LRAS, what really happens is that it could smooth out, or it could reduce the pressure. It will actually reduce the pressure on prices. I'll take your questions one by one. I have a lot of, I can see I am I'll slow down a bit. Okay, you guys also try to focus on what I am saying. Try to pay a bit more attention, because the economics I mean, there's a lot that is going on, and so I'll try to slow down. Okay, I'll try to slow down a bit, but you at the same time also try to sort of match the speed. I mean, we need to work both ways. So what we are saying is that firstly, you'll talk about spare capacity. The second thing that you will talk about is that when LRAS goes up, productive capacity would go up, the spare capacity would go up, and when the spare capacity would go up, what would happen is that you have more productive capacity now, and since you have more productive capacity now, that is going to cause that actually means that you have more resources to cater more demand now, so the impact on price level will not be that much. तो बस आप ये लिखेंगे. इनफैक्ट अगर आपकी एग्रीगेट सप्लाई का काफ़ी बढ़ जाती है, your LRAS, the extent of a rise in LRAS is quite high, that could even cause a downward pressure on prices, right? That could even cause a downward pressure on prices. So ये जो narrative है हमारा कि ये जो narrative है हमारा कि consider the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation. This is actually not really true, because you have two sides to it. ये दोनों sides आपको basically बतानी होंगी analysis में. अच्छा जी, questions देख लेते हैं. ये जो एक बच्चा है क्या, why are you looking at the sky, you ain't at top? I don't need to answer you this. You're not that important, by the way. You're answering this. Anyways, sir, if we write just one reason for both side analysis, would it be fine? नहीं तो हमने एक ही नहीं देखें. You have to write two reasons के कंजम, because they're actually you need to talk about why would inflation occur, because when AD rises, and you will also need to talk about why would inflation not occur when AD rises. So two reasons लिखेंगे आप, मतलब why would inflation not occur के two reasons आपको लिखने पड़ेंगे, एक नहीं लिखना है. Spare capacity is not the only reason. यही मैं आपको समझा रहा हूँ कि this is where there's a divergence between what Cambridge wants versus what students end up giving. ठीक है. ये कौन है? Edits by आयशा. जी आयशा, आपको समझ में आ गई बात? ठीक है, क्लियर हो गई? टू रीजंस आपको देने पड़ेंगे फॉर एक्सप्लेनिंग दैट व्हाई इन्फ्लेशन इज नॉट अकरिंग. जस्ट सेइंग दैट इट डिपेंड्स अपॉन स्पेयर कैपेसिटी. देखें, आप इस बात को समझें, दैट यू सेइंग इट डिपेंड्स अपॉन स्पेयर कैपेसिटी, you have to understand this very carefully. See, you need to understand this. यही मैं कहता हूँ कि स्टूडेंट्स को सिखाना होता है that you need to focus on what the question is saying. The question is saying, consider the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation. Now, increase in AD when you say that increase in AD causes the price level to go up, so the other side is that the price level won't go up or may go up slightly or insignificantly or very nominally, or it may go down as well, right? Especially if maybe the aggregate supply rises by a much larger extent. It may go down as well. So that is why when you're explaining the other side, the spare capacity वाला जो question है, the spare capacity वाला जो point है आपका, जो आपका spare capacity वाला point है, ये तो ये बताएगा कि आपकी aggregate demand बढ़ने से inflation क्यों नहीं आ रही है. That is going to tell you that why inflation is not occurring because of a rise in aggregate demand. ठीक है? But ये वाला जो point है aggregate supply वाला, that aggregate supply could go up as well. This point is going to tell you that why the price level could reduce, because there are two counter arguments for mentioning that why is inflation not going to occur because of a rise in AD. Will always lead to inflation. See, inflation means price level going up. So you have to tell that the price level could go down as well. Right? It's not just the price level will go up, it could go down as well. And you can go through the marking scheme as well. What I am saying is consistent. It's actually mentioned there. और उसका एक अलग मार्क है. एक मार्क आपका ये बताने का है कि it depends upon the position of AD in relation to A. So this is your spare capacity point, and this is your long run aggregate supply point, that it could increase in capacity, productive capacity could go up, and when your productive capacity goes up, a rise in productive capacity could actually increase your a rise in productive capacity would actually cause your price level to go down. ठीक है? Are we clear on this? ये जिसका भी क्वेश्चन था. शयार कहते हैं लेंथ ऑफ 8 मार्कर, आई मीन कोई कैम्ब्रिज ने रूल तो नहीं निकाला इसका कि 1000 वर्ड्स होने चाहिए या 600 वर्ड्स का ऐसे लिखना है, तो वी कांट रियली से एनीथिंग. आई मीन यू नीड टू नो कि 3 मार्क्स के लिए इतना मेरे लिए सफिशेंट है लिखना, और ये प्रैक्टिस से आता है कि जब हम just see the ideal length. I mean, I've written this answer in front of you, so that could reflect that this could be an ideal length for the answer. Anyways, so we have done the two sides to the analysis. Is it clear till here? Are we all good? Clear ho gaya sabko? Guys, good? Any questions still here? Now, moving forward, we will start with evaluation, and the evaluation would be you telling, the question was asking you that consider the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation. So in the analysis, you talked about, both situations where inflation could occur and inflation could not occur. ठीक है, ये बता दिया आपने. अब आप ये बताएं कि inflation जो है वो कब, what exactly is the criteria, whether inflation would occur or not, ये किस पर depend करेगा. That is what evaluation is. And you have 2 marks for it. तो हम इसका short paragraph लिखेंगे, उससे ज़्यादा नहीं लिखेंगे. So this is the short paragraph that you will write and you will get full 2 marks for it. कोई डायग्राम्स बनाने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. आपको डायग्राम का मार्क मिलेगा ही नहीं इस पर. अननेसेसरी वेस्ट ऑफ टाइम करेंगे अगर आप डायग्राम्स बनाएंगे तो इसके ऊपर, क्योंकि डायग्राम का मार्क ही नहीं है. डायग्राम का सिर्फ मार्क यहाँ पर है जहाँ आपने बनाना है. उसके अलावा आपको डायग्राम्स बनाने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. जहाँ पे इन्होंने मांगा है, where they've asked where to draw the diagram, only there you're drawing the diagram. Other than that, you're not drawing the diagram. There's no mark for drawing it. Now, overall, see, now this is how you'll start writing, that you'll say that, because you'll first agree that yes, overall or generally, overall means generally, the general rule is that when AD goes up, inflation does happen. Obviously, it happens. I mean, not every economy is suffering from spare capacity, right? So overall, while an increase in AD can lead to inflation, it will not always do so. Overall, while an increase in AD can lead to inflation, it will not always do so. The extent to which, क्या लिखेंगे? The extent to which increase in AD will always lead to inflation depends on spare capacity in the economy and whether the increase in AD is accompanied by improvements in AS. ठीक है जी? तो पहली चीज आपने क्या लिखा? Overall, while an increase in AD can lead to inflation, it will not always do so. हमेशा inflation नहीं आती. The extent to which inflation आती है, the extent to which inflation occurs will always lead to, the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation. Because that is what the question was. The extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation depends on number one. आपने बोला देखें किस पे डिपेंड करता है? पहली चीज ये डिपेंड करता है स्पेयर कैपेसिटी पे इन द इकोनॉमी and whether an increase in AD is accompanied by improvements in AS. ठीक है? Therefore, inflation is more likely when AD rises in an economy already operating close to full capacity. तो अगर एक economy जो है, because this is your judgment para, remember that. This evaluation in an 8 marker, the 2 marks for it, is your take on it. So you have to give your take without saying in my opinion. Don't use these words in my opinion all. So therefore inflation is more likely, you will say inflation is more likely when AD rises in an economy. ठीक है? Already operating close to full capacity. So if the economy is operating close to full capacity, then inflation is going to happen, and inflation is less likely when you have significant unused resources or significant unused productive potential. ठीक है? तो ये आपका कंप्लीट होगा, आपकी 2 मार्क्स उस पर एसोसिएटेड है. दैट यू से कि कब इन्फ्लेशन नहीं आती, you telling and consider the extent to which an increase in AD will always lead to inflation. So you, तो इसमें आप पहले तो एग्री करेंगे इसमें कि generally the general rule is that overall, yeah, you can, अच्छा इसको आप you could also write it like this. You can say that while an increase in AD is more likely to lead to inflation, it will not always do so. ये बात आपको लिखना ज़रूरी है. This is like the golden line. It will not always do so. ये evaluation में लिखेंगे. It will not always do so. And the extent to which an increase in AD will lead to inflation will depend upon the spare capacity in the economy. ठीक है? And whether an increase in AD is accompanied by improvements in AS. ठीक है? Therefore, inflation is more likely when AD rises in an economy already operating close to full capacity, and less likely when there is significant unused productive potential. So if you have significantly less or you have, let's say, unused productive capacity, then inflation will be less likely. Got it? So ये हो गया आपका question number 5 part A. Now you come to question number 5 part B. 5 part B says, assess the view that the effects of high rate of inflation are always more damaging for consumers than for firms. Assess the view that the effects of high rate of inflation are always more damaging for consumers than for firms. जी, क्या लिखेंगे आप इसमें? What do you think you will write? Shariar says, firstly, definition of inflation. You will define inflation. तो शरियार कहते हैं इन्फ्लेशन की हम डेफिनेशन दे देंगे. ठीक है शरियार, गुड. चलें दे दें आप इन्फ्लेशन की डेफिनेशन। फिर दूसरी चीज़ आप ये समझ लें कि दिस इज़ लेवल बेस्ड मार्किंग। लेवल बेस्ड मार्किंग में क्या होता है कि मार्क्स आर अवॉर्डेड बेस्ड ऑन नॉट ऑन द एग्जैक्ट पॉइंट दैट कैम्ब्रिज एक्सपेक्ट्स यू टू राइट, बट ऑन यू hear this out. Marks are awarded not based on the exact points that you're writing. Marks are awarded based on not the exact points that you're writing, as in not the exact points that you're expected to write, because you're not expected very specific pointers, because the marking is done based on a holistic judgment. तो जैसे शरियार ने कहा कि आप इन्फ्लेशन की डेफिनेशन दें, लेकिन लेट्स से अगर किसी ने इन्फ्लेशन की डेफिनेशन नहीं दी तो क्या उसका मार्क लूज होगा? मार्क लूज नहीं होगा अगर हॉलिस्टिक पे और ग्रैंड लेवल पे द स्टूडेंट सेटिस्फाइज अ गुड आंसर। ठीक है, सो इसमें 12 मार्कर में क्या होता है दैट AO1 प्लस AO2 टुगेदर आर बेसिकली ऑफ 8 मार्क्स, राइट। एंड जो लेवल 3 मार्किंग होती है आपकी, दैट इज जो लेवल, इसमें लेवल्स होते हैं, ठीक है। सो लेवल 3 के आपके मार्क्स होते हैं 6 to 8 आउट ऑफ 8, राइट। 6 is your lower boundary, ये आपकी upper boundary है। So अगर let's say you don't really define inflation, can you still get L3, or maybe can you still score let's say 7 on 8 out of from AO1 plus AO2? Yes, you still can. So overall आपने examiner को satisfy करना है that you are actually capable of that mark, ठीक है। So this is more of a qualitative assessment, ठीक है। And evaluation के marks, the evaluation marks that assessment objective 3 is basically 4 here. 4 marks आपके evaluation के, including the conclusion or the judgment that you will give. So now my question is that what exactly would be the, like what do you really have to do here? Like क्या है इसमें आप क्या करेंगे? How, what's next? Like इसमें आपने चलें ठीक है, you end up giving the definition of inflation. अब उसके बाद क्या होगा? ठीक है, क्या करेंगे जी? व्हाट्स नेक्स्ट? इसके बाद क्या करना है आपको? Assess the view that the effects of high rate of inflation are always more damaging for consumers than for firms. तो the question, इसमें जो गलतियाँ students करते हैं इस तरह के questions में, they are going to give the general limitations of inflation and the generalized benefits of inflation. Well, the question is specifically asking about whether inflation is more damaging for consumers than for firms. So what you need to do is that you need to talk about how inflation is how inflation is more damaging for consumers, as in when is it more damaging for consumers and when is it more damaging for firms and when is it not. तो again मैंने आपको बताया कि you will actually write the disadvantages of inflation for consumers, ठीक है। You will give the disadvantages of inflation for consumers, then you will give the advantages of inflation for consumers पहले, ठीक है। एडवांटेजेस भी आप देंगे इसके अंदर एनालिसिस में, टू साइडेड। अगर आपने ये नहीं किया, लेट्स से आपने एडवांटेजेस नहीं दिए, प्रॉब्लम हो जाएगी यहाँ पे, आपको एवैल्यूएशन के मार्क्स नहीं मिलेंगे। फिर अगर आपकी एवैल्यूएशन टू साइडेड नहीं है, आपको एवैल्यूएशन के मार्क्स नहीं मिलेंगे। फिर आपको डिसएडवांटेजेस देने हैं फॉर, यू नीड टू गिव द डिसएडवांटेजेस ऑफ इन्फ्लेशन टू द फर्म्स, ठीक है। यू विल गिव द डिसएडवांटेज ऑफ इन्फ्लेशन टू द फर्म्स एंड देन यू विल गिव द एडवांटेजेस एज वेल टू द फर्म्स। मोर स्पेसिफिकली इसमें, क्योंकि देखें आप ये समझ लें कि AO1 प्लस AO2 मिलाकर इज़ फॉर 8 मार्क्स, तो 4 और 4 में डिवाइड कर दें आप। 4 मार्क्स कंज्यूमर्स के लिए एलोकेट कर दें, 4 फर्म्स के लिए कर दें, ठीक है। तो 4 के अंदर आप 3 डिसएडवांटेजेस दे दें, 1 एडवांटेज दे दें। इसका कोई फिक्स रूल नहीं है, लेकिन क्योंकि सवाल इज़ मोर फोकस्ड ऑन द डिसएडवांटेजेस, तो आप अगर 2 to 3 डिसएडवांटेजेस भी दे रहे हैं, सो 1 to 2 एडवांटेज, ठीक है, मैक्सिमम 2 to 3, 1 to 2. इसी तरह 4 firms की disadvantages जब आप यानी when you if you're allocating 4 marks to firms, then again 2 to 3 disadvantages for the firms and 1 to 2 advantages for the firms. तो ये होगा आपका analysis. ठीक है, got it? सबको समझ में आ गया? अगेन क्वेश्चन देख लें. assess the view. अगर आप कमांड वर्ड्स की देखें, ये हमने स्टूडेंट के साथ शेयर भी की हुई है. assess के अंदर नंबर 1 यू नीड टू मेक एन इन्फॉर्म जजमेंट. ये आप किस में करेंगे? AO3 के पैराग्राफ में. यू शुड राइट अबाउट बोथ साइड्स ऑफ अ पर्टिकुलर इशू. देखिए बोथ साइड्स लिखा है. बोथ साइड्स कुड बी प्रोज एंड कॉन्स, फॉर एंड अगेंस्ट एनीथिंग. सो इफ यू टॉकिंग अबाउट इन्फ्लेशन, इट कुड बी pros and cons of inflation with respect to the question. Generalized pros and cons नहीं देने, consumers of firms की बात हो रही है. And then come to a supported conclusion about which, if any, is best. Anyways, इसको देखते हैं अभी. So you will start off by saying that inflation is basically, inflation refers to a sustained increase in the general price level in an economy, and a high rate of inflation can affect both consumers and producers. And then you'll say that a major cost of high inflation for consumers is, now let's talk about the cost of inflation for consumers. And a major cost of high inflation for consumers is loss of purchasing power. Loss of purchasing power, the first disadvantage. But then again, like I said, cause, effect, consequence. So what really happens is, what is the cause of loss of purchasing power? Inflation. And because of inflation, the effect is that purchasing power is going down, but you have to explain how this works and what is the consequence of that. So you will say that as prices rise faster than nominal incomes, because generally during inflation, your prices are going up, but they're going up faster than nominal income. So people don't really witness a rise in real incomes. In fact, sometimes they witness a downfall in real incomes. And because of that, what happens is that consumers, especially with people who are on fixed wages and they have weak bargaining power, their real income falls. So as prices rise faster than nominal income, especially for those on fixed incomes or with weak bargaining power, real incomes fall. So real incomes start falling. ठीक है, real income starts falling. And मैंने आपको वही बताया, cause, effect, consequence. उसका consequence क्या होता है for fall in real income? That this reduces consumers' ability to maintain their standard of living. And इससे क्या होता है? That this disproportionately affects pensioners, low-income households, and public sector workers. And this is actually one of the reasons, guys. इसको आपको मेंशन करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, लेकिन अगर ये इन्फ्लेशन का जनरलाइज्ड क्वेश्चन होता तो आपने अपने कोर्स में पढ़ा होगा, अपने कॉलेज में या जहाँ से भी आप पढ़ते हैं, कि इन्फ्लेशन कॉजेज अ रीडिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ इनकम और इट डिसप्रोपोर्शनेटली अफेक्ट्स सम. आई मीन, because of inflation, some might feel inflation, some might not really feel inflation. So it's a disproportionate effect. It's not that inflation is affecting everyone the same way. So it causes a redistribution of income, where incomes would, flow from poor to the rich, where we say that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And that causes an unequal distribution of income. So especially when you have, and one of the reasons why inflation causes an unequal distribution of income is that especially people who are pensioners, I mean, their pensions aren't really rising, but inflation is rising. People on low incomes, right? Low income households and, public sector workers, they might witness falling real incomes because of it. जी ये disadvantage ही है, हम disadvantages कर रहे हैं क्योंकि question ही आपसे disadvantages का पूछ रहा है, is it more damaging? The second disadvantage has to do with fiscal drag. So you will say that हाँ first paragraph में बस आप define करेंगे, you will move forward, that's it, end of story. Answer the question. The question is saying, the question says assess the view that effects of high rate of inflation are always more damaging for consumers. You don't have to talk about demand pull, cost push inflation here. That's it. You come to directly to the point. High inflation can also cause fiscal drag. High inflation will cause fiscal drag. This is the second disadvantage, where individuals are pushed into higher tax brackets. What really happens is that, especially when you have demand pull inflation and when AD is going up, so, workers push for higher wages as well. Because when AD is going up and workers are asked to produce more, they ask for higher wages. And sometimes, and when the price level goes up because of a rise in AD, when inflation happens, so you have rising prices, so workers are pushing for higher wages and they aren't really getting higher wages, in fact. And even a slightest increase in their wage, can actually push them or throw them into higher tax brackets. So एक तो पहले ही inflation की वजह से they're at a disadvantage because their real incomes are going down. Now they're even pushed into higher tax brackets. That drastically reduces consumption even further, right? So this happens, fiscal drag happens when your tax brackets aren't really adjusted for inflation, right? So they're pushed into higher tax brackets due to nominal wage increase that do not reflect real income gain. So, workers were asking for higher wages, some of them got it, but then that wasn't a real income gain, it was just a nominal income gain. So as a result, disposable incomes may fall further, intensifying the negative impact on consumers. So disposable income may fall further, intensifying the negative impact on consumers, right? So you have to talk about the disadvantages for consumers. So हम पहले consumers की बात करें. So this is the second disadvantage. The third disadvantage that you can give is, and we're going to be doing only 3, that consumers face shoe leather cost as well. And you can say that apart from shoe leather cost, your consumer confidence goes down as well, by the way. Especially consumer confidence, the fact that consumer confidence goes down because in inflation, which can lead to precautionary behavior, meaning that firms would sort of, get more cautious regarding their spending. But then you will give the advantages of inflation to consumers. ये ज़रूरी है आपको देना. ये analysis का part है. इसके बगैर आपको evaluation के marks नहीं मिलने वाले, मैं आपको ये बता दूँ. However, you will say, not all consumers will lose, and it's not that, the effect of inflation may not always be damaging. The effect of inflation may not always be damaging, right? And the effect of inflation may not always be damaging. In fact, the thing is that the reason why the effect of inflation may not always be damaging is because you see what happens is that consumers, they also have debts, like, they've taken house loans, mortgages, and sometimes these loans are on fixed interest, right? The thing is that inflation erodes or reduces the real value of their debt. So for instance, I need to pay you, let's say $100,000, but $100,000 that were taken 10 years back are not worth the same. So in real terms, I'm paying you less, although I'm paying you back 100,000, but I'm paying you less. So what we're saying is that especially, outstanding debt, especially on fixed rate loans, those people will benefit because what happens is that the real value of the debt goes down. So debt holders benefit. So consumers acting as debt holders may benefit here. Okay? The second thing that you need to know is that asset holders, like people who hold assets, let's say buildings, right? Or homeowners with assets, because inflation mein asset prices go up. So they benefit. Because the price of wealth goes up, right, in inflation. So when the price of wealth goes up or asset prices go up in inflation, what happens is that they would benefit because their wealth would increase. And this is actually, again, another reason why income inequality exists, or why inflation disproportionately affects some people while benefiting some people. Inflation benefits some while it hurts others, right? This is what we are saying. So, and this is again another reason why inflation also causes income inequality, because the rich people are the ones who have a lot of wealth and they witness a sudden rise in their asset prices, so they become more wealthier, right? But अभी हम consumers के perspective में बात करें तो हम कह रहे हैं कि consumers, हम चलें ठीक है, you can call them rich consumers, but not all are rich. But then, those consumers who have assets, they would witness higher prices, so for them it won't really matter. In fact, they're happy because of inflation. But that's the end of story for consumers. Now you move on to firms. Got it? Now you will move on to firms and you will say that firms may also experience serious problems during periods of high inflation. ठीक है? Firms will also experience serious problems during periods of high inflation. अब तक यहाँ का कोई question है? Any question? So firms may also witness serious problems because of high inflation. Why would firms witness so many problems? The first thing that you will talk about is that rising prices in the economy would lead to a loss of domestic and international competitiveness. अब यहाँ पे kids will drift away. They will start writing about exports falling. That is not the question. The examiner will write NAQ against it, not answer the question, or he will just write TV. That is, there's no mark for what you're writing. It's just irrelevant, unnecessary crap. So rising prices can lead to loss of domestic and international competitiveness, but then you need to talk about how this affects producers. So what happens is that cost of production, and this especially happens due to, so inflation makes your domestic goods and your international, if you're an exporter, a firm could be exporting as well. So it reduces your competitiveness, meaning that your goods become less competitive compared to others because your cost is rising during inflation. So as higher costs are passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. So and especially it reduces the demand for exports, but then you're not talking about exports for the economy, you're talking about exports for the producers. So it reduces their overall revenue. ठीक है? हम producers के revenue की बात करें, we're not talking about export revenues here. Secondly, firms may also incur menu cost because they would need to frequently update prices and catalogs because of inflation. There's a constant, especially when inflation is volatile. This really happens when inflation is volatile. There's a constant, firms are, constantly updating their prices and catalogs. And more importantly, high inflation often leads to rising cost of production. Again, high inflation, एक ये चीज़ आप समझ लें कि जब inflation आती है, when you have a lot of inflation in the economy, or simply when you have inflation in the economy, then workers demand for higher wages as well. So workers demand for higher wages because they need to feed their families. So, there's this thing that is known as wage price spiral. Now, अब ये लिखने की आपको ज़रूरत नहीं है, because you're not talking about economic consequences. But what you need to talk about is that when workers start demanding higher wages, then firms do ultimately have to offer them higher wages at some point. So that further causes more inflation because it results into an inflationary spiral in the economy that is quite difficult to control and would require monetary authorities to intervene in the economy. So what we're saying is that high inflation can lead to rising cost of production, particularly raw material cost and wages. And for the firms, this is bad because this will squeeze their profit margins or reduce their profit margins, especially if firms are operating in very highly competitive environments, especially when they have a lot of competition. They're actually suffering because they would need to reduce their profit margins, and they also know that they can't really pass on these higher costs to consumers. So they are suffering. But then again, the third thing that you can write is that inflation increases uncertainty, which is often, also referred to in economics as inflationary noise. And what this means is that it makes it difficult for firms to distinguish between change in relative prices and changes in the general price level. Firms could think that the prices in the economy are rising and so is their product's pricing rising. Their product pricing is also rising. Like their product is getting expensive as well. And they might mistake this as maybe the product's price is rising because it represents higher demand for their product. So it would lead to wrong decisions being made. Maybe they overinvest and increase production while, they shouldn't have. So as a result, firms misinterpret price signals, leading to poor production and investment decisions, which ultimately would have an impact on profitability over time and also firms' efficiency as well. And especially, why? Because firms would, or maybe because when, let's say, prices are going down, or they aren't really going up that much, or prices aren't really going up that much, and they might think that prices aren't really going up that much, so it means that maybe there's recession in the economy, or there's an economic slowdown, because economic slowdown happens first and then you have recession. So things are bad in the economy. Well, things may be good because maybe prices are slowing down because aggregate supply is rising. So again, they could mistaken, I mean, it could be mistaken as a recession, or it could be mistaken as a fall in demand for their product, and they might think that maybe we shouldn't really invest. And that would reduce efficiency over time and loss of profitability over time. But again, you give an advantage. You say that, however, firms do not always lose from inflation. It's not that firms will always lose from inflation, especially when the inflation is demand pull. And if inflation is demand pull, then higher prices will be accompanied by rising demand. So if inflation is demand pull inflation results in economic growth. Because you see, your real GDP is going up, right? I mean, in the above diagram, your real GDP was going up. So this is beneficial for the economy, and it's also beneficial for the firms, because a rise in AD is accompanied by a rise in consumer spending. So if your consumer spending is going up, firms would witness, although you have inflation, but then firms would witness rising incomes and rising profits as well because of growth. Especially, so if inflation is demand pull inflation, that is not bad for firms. Higher prices may be accompanied by rising demand and sales volume, which will allow firm to earn more revenue. So that's a good thing. अब evaluation में आपने क्या करना होगा? The question says assess the view, and evaluation is like 4 marks. So आपने analysis में बता दिया how is it really bad for consumers, how is it not bad for firms, how is it bad for firms, how is it not bad for firms. दोनों sides बता दिया आपने. Now in evaluation you will weigh up these arguments and you will give a judgment. But then you have to really tell, ये आप समझ लें कि आपको explicit बात करनी होगी इसमें कि when is inflation more damaging to consumers than firms, and in what circumstances is inflation more damaging to firms than consumers. इस पे explicit बात करनी होगी. Generally, जिन conclusions पे हम marks नहीं देते हैं, as an examiner I am saying this, is when students end up saying, you know, inflation has both pros and cons, so it depends and all of that, but then it depends on what. That is not really clear. So students are not really giving a judgment on whether inflation is more damaging to consumers or not. But ये आपको किस तरह देना होगा? आपको इस तरह देना होगा कि देखें, इन्फ्लेशन कंज्यूमर्स के लिए डैमेजिंग हो भी सकती है, फर्म से ज़्यादा नहीं भी हो सकती है. कब होती है, कब नहीं होती, ये बताना पड़ेगा आपको. और दूसरा, आपको इस पे ज़रूर बात करनी पड़ेगी. देखें, हमेशा ज़्यादा डैमेजिंग नहीं है. ये कोई यूनिवर्सल, ये एब्सोल्यूट नहीं है. हम अपने क्लासेस में, अपने जो हमारी लाइव क्लासेस होती हैं कोर्स की, उसमें हम लोग अपने स्टूडेंट्स को यही सिखाते हैं कि इस तरह के क्वेश्चंस में आप ये बोलें कि स्पेशली व्हेन द क्वेश्चन इज सेइंग इट्स नॉट ऑलवेज, तो हम ये बताते हैं कि इसमें आप वर्ड्स यूज़ करें, यू नो, इट्स नॉट ऑल, दिस नैरेटिव इज़ नॉट ऑलवेज एब्सोल्यूट, या इट्स नॉट अ यूनिवर्सल थिंग टू हैपन. So you say that the claim that high inflation is always more damaging for consumers than for firms is too absolute. ये बहुत absolute है, universal law नहीं है, ऐसा नहीं होता हर दफ़ा. While consumers clearly face significant cost, consumers को cost तो face हो रही है, consumers के लिए damaging inflation है. ये बात हमें clearly पता है, consumers को नुकसान होता है inflation से, because purchasing power drop हो जाती है, simple. ठीक है, these consequences are not universal. ऐसा नहीं है कि हर दफ़ा इकोनॉमी, बिकॉज प्लस इट ऑल्सो डिपेंड्स अपॉन द रेट ऑफ इन्फ्लेशन एज वेल, बिकॉज वी ऑल्सो नो एट द सेम टाइम वी नो दैट सम कंज्यूमर्स बेनिफिट थ्रू राइजिंग एसेट वैल्यूज एंड फॉलिंग रियल वैल्यू ऑफ डेट. तो ये आप वे अप कर रहे हैं आर्गूमेंट्स, यू आर सेइंग दैट. उसके बाद सही है, एक तो ये आपने बोला. सिमिलरली, ऑल्दो फर्म्स फेस हायर कॉस्ट एज वेल, बट देन दे मे ऑल्सो गेन इफ इन्फ्लेशन इज डिमांड पुल. सो वी नो दैट फर्म्स वुड फेस हायर कॉस्ट एज वेल, they would have a problem because of inflation, but then it will also benefit them as well, because you know, it will also benefit them as well, because the thing is that if inflation is demand pull, then firms would witness higher profits. Simple. If inflation is cost push, they would witness falling profits and revenues, because they would be ending up laying off workers, and because their cost is rising, and it's not a good thing. It's a bad situation for firms. But then what you say is that the impact of inflation, the impact of high inflation is not the same in all situations for consumers and firms. It's not always that for consumers it's always bad, because the question was saying that assess the view that the effects of high rate of inflation are always more damaging for consumers, right? So you say that no, it's not always more damaging for consumers, and it's not the same in all situations for consumers and firms. And what does it really depends on? तो आपने बताया कब होता है नुकसानदेह, कब नहीं होता, वो किस पे डिपेंड करता है. एंड इट डिपेंड्स अपॉन द रीजन ऑफ इन्फ्लेशन. नंबर वन, कि वाई इज इन्फ्लेशन हैपनिंग. So, and it also depends upon whether firms can pass higher cost to consumers. If firms can pass higher cost to consumers, then it's more damaging for consumers, seriously, and not damaging for firms, right? If the reason is demand pull inflation, then I mean it's less harmful for both. While if it's cost push inflation, it's more harmful for firms. It's more harmful for firms, and it's more harmful for firms. But the fact that the government could also support the consumers through relief programs and all of that, as part of fiscal policy, or as part of measures to offer relief to consumers, that could also put offset some of that pressure on consumers. And it also depends upon how quickly and how much your incomes and wages rise as compared to prices in the economy. This is actually what will depend whether inflation is harmful to consumers or not, or more harmful to consumers. I mean, if wages and incomes aren't really rising as in line with inflation, it will definitely be very damaging to consumers, because their purchasing power will drastically fall because of a fall in real incomes. And your conclusion will be, अब conclusion जब आप दें तो आप exactly question के narrative को address करें, जो कि क्या कह रहा है कि inflation is always more damaging. So आप इधर question के narrative को address करें और आप बोलें, आप क्या बोलेंगे, आप बोलेंगे कि देखें इन्फ्लेशन जो होती है, टू कंक्लूड वाइल हाई इन्फ्लेशन ऑफन हैज सिवियर एंड विजिबल कॉन्सिक्वेंसेज. यू एग्री विद द स्टेटमेंट कि ठीक है, बहुत विजिबल कॉन्सिक्वेंसेज हमें नज़र आते हैं कंज्यूमर्स के लिए भी और फर्म्स के लिए भी. वी आर नॉट डिनाइंग दैट. हमेशा एग्री करें विद द स्टेटमेंट, लेकिन एग्री का मतलब ये नहीं है कि आप ये बोलें कि इट इज़ ऑलवेज मोर डैमेजिंग. यू बिकॉज देखें बात वही है ना कि प्रोज एंड कॉन्स दोनों के लिए हैं, ठीक है. तो इस सिचुएशन में आप बोलेंगे it's very visible that inflation has negative impacts on consumers and firms, but it is not always more damaging for them than for firms. ये कहना भी गलत है. ये statement universal और absolute है. ये गलत है कहना that it is always more damaging for them than for firms. ठीक है. बात वही है that which group is more negatively impacted varies. ये हर दफ़ा vary करता है, ज़रूरी नहीं है कि it's the same for everyone, and it also depends upon country to country and the rate of inflation as well. And it also depends whether it's cost push, demand pull, and it also depends whether how quickly how quickly incomes will rise and how quickly wages will rise, and whether firms can pass higher cost to consumers or not. And in fact, why are we even thinking that kaun zyada damaging hai? Like, consumers ko damage hai, firms ko. It could also be, in some cases, firms may be equally or even more adversely affected. So आप ये बोलें कि ज़रूरी नहीं consumers are always more adversely affected. In some cases firms could be equally affected or even more adversely affected as well. और firms कब adversely affected होते हैं, especially if inflation is cost push. If inflation is cost push and you have your raw material costs and wages are rising, what will that do? It will squeeze profit margins, right? So it will be very disastrous and a problem for firms. It will shrink their profits. They would have to lay off workers as well, ultimately reduce their production, maybe close off some business units. So rising raw material and wage costs will squeeze profit margins, severely affecting their competitiveness and their business as well. So what we're saying is that in some cases, firms may be equally or even more adversely affected, especially if inflation is basically cost push inflation. So this narrative that you saying inflation is always more harmful for consumers is actually not correct. It's not true. आप ये मत बोलें कि it is incorrect. इस तरह के वर्ड यूज़ नहीं करते. इतना assertive नहीं होना आपने. आप क्या बोलें, या ये भी आप ना बोलें it's always more damaging for consumers. इस तरह के नहीं आप करें. आप बोलें कि हर दफ़ा ऐसा नहीं होता कि it's more damaging. Firm ज़्यादा के लिए भी damaging हो सकता है और उसमें बताएं कब हो सकता है. ठीक है. And that's how you sort of answer. And this is basically a qualitative assessment, especially for a 12 marker that is level based marking. And, overall, this is what exactly examiners are looking for in answers. when we, and this is exactly what we teach in our courses as well, at how to tackle it. इसमें the more past paper questions you do, the more practice you do, उतना ज़्यादा आप इसमें you will start getting the hang of it, कि conclusions कैसे लिखने होते हैं, assess whether में क्या होगा, consider whether में क्या होगा, so that's how you need to write. But judgment देते वक्त 12 markers में, judgment देते वक्त 12 markers में, I'm repeating that, judgment देते वक्त 12 markers में आप जो क्वेश्चन का नैरेटिव है उसको बोलें कि हाँ ये हो भी सकता है, ये नहीं भी हो सकता है, बट और किन किन केसेस में ये होगा, किन किन में नहीं होगा. और अगर क्वेश्चन कह रहा है दिस ऑलवेज हैपन्स, तो यू से कि ये कोई यूनिवर्सल रूल नहीं है, या ये इतना एब्सोल्यूट नहीं है जितना कि क्वेश्चन हमसे पूछ रहा है कि है. गॉट इट? सो दिस इज व्हाट अ गुड आंसर सॉर्ट ऑफ लुक्स लाइक, एंड दैट्स ऑल. If you have any other questions, you can ask me. Otherwise, I'm going to be ending the stream now. If you like this stream, do share with your friends. Let others know. We're going to be continuing these streams. Okay? I saw some people just shitting on the comments. I mean, this ये तो होता ही रहता है. तो आप लोग make sure that those who haven't really watched it वो इसकी recording देखें. And if you have any further questions, you can always ask me or DM me on my Instagram, and that's all. So no questions. I'm going to be ending the stream here then. I'm assuming that you guys are now aware of how to handle, and okay, so